Talk about it
Ladies
together.
and gentlemen, we're going to bring Stephen Reeves into the room with Fellowship Southwest. If you watched our Christianity Public Square, you saw Stephen. He has a history of in law and lobbying. They're doing some great work around the border right now at Fellowship Southwest. So excited to have him in here and all those folks who are with him. So, Stephen, Antoine's going to give us some updates on some of the rhetoric from Trump here in his speech. Feel free to jump in as you go. What did we miss while we were talking that we need to engage, Antoine?
Yeah. I just wrote a few of his quotes down, and I think the speech was really interesting. If there's just a lot of interesting things he said. So here's one of the things he says: we will not only be measured by the battles we win, but the wars we end. Thought that was interesting. You mentioned with our last guest, our legacy will be that of a peacemaker. That's what Trump says. Of course, he wants to change Gulf of Mexico to Gulf America. I don't know if that's really all that notable, but
it's pretty notable.
I mean, I guess it feels like.
I mean,
feels
every
like a
map
flex
in the world, like we got to redo maps and things for.
It's a weird flex, as far as I'm concerned.
It's a super weird flex.
This was really interesting. He said we will pursue our manifest destiny, and I think he was talking about heading into Mars, but it was interesting to use the terminology manifest destiny. Say he wants to put a flag on Mars. So it's interesting that he would use that language.
It's very intentional language.
And then ambition is the lifeblood of a great nation. I think that's a discussion point. The spirit of the frontier is written on our soul. And then he began to recount a very opportunistic view of American history and the taking over of the continent as untamed lands. And he just kind of left out the genocide. And then he went to bring a spirit of unity in a world that has been angry and violent. That's what he said he wanted to do, while also saying we won't back down and sounding rather, in my opinion, angry and violent. So those are some of the things I saw. I think it's some things that we could keep going, and I'm very interested in hearing if you guys listen to the speech. What are some of the things that stood out to you? So post that into the comment section. And Stephen, did you get a chance to hear it all? And what stood out to you?
Well, I was trying to listen a little bit of your previous guest and the speech at the same time, and so a little bit hard to hear much of. First of all, thanks. I'm really happy to be with y'all. Thanks for the invitation. With our work at Fellowship Southwest, I'm really paying attention to what this administration, the new policies would probably mean for the border. And so I understand he, declared a state of emergency at the border. I'll be very interested to see what that means to him and what the changes are. I think that a lot of folks can agree how folks have been coming and the state of the border is not optimal from anybody's perspective. But I'm pretty concerned about further militarization, and that's a lot what that sounds like to me.
Yeah, I think he wants to reenact the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798. I think that's going to be an official thing he's doing in that area. And he also mentioned the labeling the cartel as terrorists, as let's see, what's the word here? Foreign terrorists.
That's really interesting to me. I want to talk about that a second because so many of the people that we see and that our ministries minister to on the border are the people fleeing the cartel, right? They're leaving their country, usually, Central South America, sometimes Mexico, because of the cartel violence in their town. And so the only pathway they've had has been to sort of run and get here and try to claim asylum, right? Through the CBP One app or whatever they can do. But being a victim of cartel violence is not a reason you can get asylum. But on the other hand, if the government's now saying these are terrorist organizations, and and that they're controlling these countries, then it seems like that would be a real good reason to give somebody asylum. And so it's kind of a little bit of an interesting catch-22, because right now we don't say that you can claim asylum because you've been a victim of cartel violence. But now if you're saying, hey, your enemy is my enemy, I'm coming because the people you just said are terrorist organizations, people ought to be thinking about a different pathway to asylum for that reason.
Now, hold up. I just want to
Interesting.
take a second here, just to pause, because if anybody's watching the inauguration right now, we've got Reverend Sewell, who is ultimately recreating the last parts of the "I Have a Dream" speech from Dr. Martin Luther King, with a lot of his drama as well. Just I know I'm cutting in the middle of this a little bit, Stephen.
Yeah, that's all right.
I'm not excited about this.
Well, such complicated feelings.
It's a super complicated feeling right now.
It feels the facial expression of Donald Trump feels patronizing.
I think the whole thing,
and I'm not trying to target, I'm just saying, as I look at it, he's looking at him and he's like, do your little thing.
Well, I think the whole thing feels patronizing, particularly given even what Stephen's talking about. Right. I think there's so much of what Dr. King was really about that was not obviously just around African-American rights, but it was civil rights. It was really engaging the issues of not only Black community, but really all communities, all ethnic communities. He's, when we started Threaded, it was a very diverse group, and many of them had their stories about what Dr. King's work meant to them. And in fact, I can thinking about one of our friends who was Chinese, and he talks about this idea that it was the work that Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement did that broke down the ban on the Chinese Immigration Act, that ultimately allowed now his family to come over from China in 1968 with the new immigration bill. And here we are in the midst of, as Dr. Alexia talked about earlier, and Steve, you can probably attest to this, the sequel to a president who demonstrated that he had some of the most stringent and I don't even know how to call it, one of the most stringent laws around immigration, and Dr. King is being sort of called out in the midst of it. It feels like extremely ironic in the midst of that. So
it's just really hard. It's hard that there seems to be two competing philosophies that are trying to be melded together here tonight, that they don't feel correctly melded, and that's why the feeling it's hard to on 1 minute say, hey, we're gonna separate these people from us, while also
drawing on somebody who's drawing people to us.
Yeah.
I don't, Stephen.
I mean, I just gotta say, from essentially the beginning of our immigration policy, it has been racialized. Absolutely. Chinese Exclusionary Act, right? And that's evident just throughout our history, but it's particularly evident with this president, right? I mean, he started his entire campaign calling people coming up from the South racists and murderers and drug dealers, and if that's not, racism, just saying these people are all bad, it's pretty hard to figure out a different definition. And on top of that, then he said, we don't want people from S-hole countries, right? Remember that? I mean, that is just, what do those all have in common, right? And so I'm with you. It is sort of the height of whitewashing MLK to have that right there, in my opinion. I think if you think about King talking about the isms, that he was fighting, capitalism, militarism, racism. I don't know, kind of a better poster boy for capitalism and militarism than perhaps this incoming president. And so, I'm with y'all. It's hard to the feeling in the pit of the stomach is hard to explain, and I probably especially hard to explain if somebody else doesn't have it when they're
Yeah.
seeing that, right? Oh,
Yeah.
it's rough, man.
I think that's one of the hardest pieces. This feeling that you're feeling right now, and that we're all feeling, at least here on this call, is exactly what I remember from the first movie, like having every day. And I think we forget this constant barrage that we're about to get into of these things that are being said from the leader of the country, and from those around him, that seem to challenge, for at least my opinion, some of the foundational aspects of what it means to love your neighbor. Um,
Mhm.
and it's of course what we're seeing here is we just saw multiple religious leaders, and particularly I know we had Christian leaders, right? Franklin Graham, we had this reverend who was just doing the MLK sort of reboot, um, and we are party to this, right? Like we are
Mhm.
with this, we are supporting this, and it's really rough to experience.
Yeah,
To be reminded that this is the experience that we're going to
Right.
be having for a little bit.
yeah.
You know?
I
Yeah.
I live in this world where even in church, away from politics, I get frustrated at doing the right things or saying the right things at the right time simply because society or the environment dictates that it should be said, as opposed to something that feels driven and authentic and real and
Mm.
passionate, right? And so I'm like that in church anyway, where we do things and we say things. I don't know that we always mean what we say, but we certainly know that we're supposed to say those things
Yeah.
at any given moment. And it drives me crazy when we do that. I hate the show. I hate any aspect of showing like that. Like, and so when I have a guy that stands up here who I'm sure that preacher believes in Martin Luther King,
Sure.
and his
Mhm.
goal
Yeah.
was to properly represent in a dramatic and passionate way what Dr. King means. And yet for me, it just landed like, we're just gonna give this guy a chance to do this because today's MLK Day, and nothing about what we're going to do is really going to be informed, by the concepts that Dr. King truly stood for. And and Trump mentioned it. He mentions MLK in his speech as
Yeah.
well.
Right.
So he's saying these things, but I don't know, man. I just don't like it feels disingenuous and inauthentic, and I just have a problem with it.
Yeah, I believe that for sure. And obviously we're gonna have more of that, um, and particularly in the next couple of weeks, days, whatever it may be, we're gonna see the part that makes us feel odd at work,
Mhm.
as he deals with those who are immigrants. What are you guys prepping for, Stephen, on your side of your work here?
Well, a few things, and I want to come back to that word you used a second ago and say, in the big picture, I'm trying to prepare for that constant barrage that you just talked about.
Yeah.
And it's such a tension. I wrote about this for our Fellowship Southwest folks, where you've got, on the one hand, the sort of need to not be pulled by every single comment and every single tweet or X, and like the day to day can be so overwhelming with this constant barrage of things that get you in your feelings, and like you just want to lash out. But this is a long haul, we got
Yeah.
4 years, and so I think there's this tension between going back to King. He talked about the arc of the moral universe is long but bends towards
Right.
justice. And so
Right.
on the one hand, I'm thinking about, okay, this is long, I got to stay in it, I got to be prepared for the long haul. But then also he talked about the fierce urgency of now,
Of now.
right?
Yeah.
And so that's just like, I'm feeling that tension a whole lot. Like, how do I, not get burned out? How do I not let his words dictate what we do as an organization or my feelings personally, and be ready for that long haul struggle? And so that's kind of where I am today. I will say, on the border, we're I think we're preparing for a few things with our partners. And I don't know kind of which way it's going to go. I think a lot of times in the past, I've had ideas of what a policy change will mean for the migrant flow, and I've been wrong. And so on the one hand, I think it's possible that people really, if CBP One app goes away and there's like no real way to access asylum, maybe folks will stop coming to a certain degree, and maybe we will have less flow, less numbers. And right, we've seen that a little bit in the last few months. Some of the shelters are not as full. On the other hand, I mean, people are fleeing for their lives, and whether or not an app is working or there's a legal pathway, they're going to come anyway. And like the first Trump administration, the shelters fill way up, and the need for us to support goes way up. I will say one of our main partners that's on the U.S. side, most of them are in Mexico, but one on the U.S. side has been sending me messages he's been getting from the people he's been working with over the last 4 years with the Department of Homeland Security, saying, thanks for all you've done, Pastor. Thanks for how you've helped these folks. I'm resigning effective Monday. I hope to see you around, And so the massive shift in personnel is going to be interesting to watch as well. And then, we're thinking about our churches that we know that serve immigrant communities far from the border, and thinking about, okay, what's the flow going south? What is this? What are these mass deportations really going to mean? And how can we be present with those families, present with those folks as that likely happens?
Yeah, Stephen, you're doing some really great work, and obviously talking in terms of where the church is and where Fellowship Southwest is. I'd love if I can merge a conversation here.
Sure.
Do you have a half second? You running someplace right now?
No.
Okay, I want to bring in a good friend of ours who is actually an immigration lawyer in Houston, just to kind of get into this conversation with us a little bit, because I think it'll be fun to kind of see somebody who's kind of on the ministry side, obviously been in the lobby side, but who's right on the front. So anybody who's been a friend of Color Commentary has engaged with Alice K, and K Immigration has been one of our sponsors as well for when we did Christianity Public Square. So I'm just going to bring in Alice K into the space to talk. Alice, you're down in Houston. Hello, welcome. Good to see you.
What's up, Alice?
Hi. Hey guys, how's it going?
Good.
Hey, Alice,
So
nice to
obviously
meet
you guys you were hearing a little bit about what Stephen Reeves was talking about. I saw some head nodding from you in different ways, particularly as he was talking about flow and deportation. What were you hearing, and how does that connect with the work that you do down in Houston?
Yeah, so I didn't hear the whole conversation, but
yeah, sure.
When I chimed in, I was hearing Stephen make some of the points that I feel very strongly about, and I was planning on making. So we have a little private chat going. Yeah, we have a little private chat going. I was like, this Stephen guy knows what he's talking about. I had no idea he was going to read it. I thought it was private. So there you go, Stephen. Props to you.
Well, thank you.
One of the things that you mentioned that I kind of want to, make a point about is you talked about your organization is helping people who are fleeing the cartels. Like, that's the reason a lot of them are coming to the United States and seeking protection and asylum, is because they are fleeing these people that now Trump is saying he's designating as terrorist organizations. I think it's, I have mixed feelings about that, because legally we don't know how it's going to play out yet.
Right.
I definitely think these cartels a lot of times act like terrorist organizations, and we do need to have some increased things that happen in the United States to protect from that incursion, and how it affects our people, how it affects, across borders. I do think we need to take them more seriously, because, they're kind of running rampant. But what makes me nervous about that is, like you mentioned, a lot of these people, good people, they're not getting help in their home countries. The cartels are running amok. The cartels are acting like terrorist organizations, taking down families, churches, organizations, communities, and they have no option but to flee. And then a lot of them feel they have no option except to come north and, to try to come to the United States to seek protection in the form of asylum. And I also want to agree with you that fleeing cartels is not the basis for granting asylum in the United States. And so you're right. Everything that you said about where does that leave us, that's where me as an immigration lawyer, we get nervous. Where does that leave us? And then also, Trump mentioned this Alien Enemies Act of 1798. I mean, I heard it on the campaign trail and I Googled it then, but I'm looking at it today and, getting a little more information. It's one of those things that you're like, surely that's not actually going to happen. But it was one of the very first things he mentioned. I mean, immigration was his first point in his inauguration speech today. And this was one of the things he brought up. And this act back in 1798, I mean, that's what they used. They've used it 3 times in American history: the War of 1812, World War I, and World War II. And this is it's most famously known for the Japanese, internment
camps. Right.
And basically it grants the president power to detain, relocate, and remove from the United States any non-citizen from a specific country that he has designated, either during a specific declared period of time of war that requires Congress approval, or during approval or what the president calls an invasion, which is the language he used in his acceptance speech today. And that does not require congressional approval. So legally, he can invoke this act without congressional approval that gives him the power to do these things. And it's not got a great track record in American history. And it doesn't seem in sync with some of the other language we heard about, Martin Luther King and unity. And like you guys were talking about, it seems like there were kind of some things that are a little bit different.
Not even a little bit different. That's a lot different. I mean, that's the crazy part is, as we're going to go through the next 4 years, as we did the previous time he was in office, there's going to be this desire, because the rhetoric is so outrageous, to try to position it in a rational place. And I don't believe anymore that that's fully where that exists. And we're going to need, I think, really good workers in this space to be constantly calling that out, right? The term of, obviously, truth telling is such a big piece of what everybody wants to talk about. We've got to start telling the truth about what these things are. We've got to continue to educate, right? Like, there's plenty of people who listened to the inauguration speech today and so they heard this act of 1798 and they're like, oh, that's interesting. What's that? Right. And not understanding like the ways that it was utilized in history. And there's plenty of people who won't even care about that. And it's that constant thing that we've talked about, is like, who are we high-fiving in history, right? As we look back in our historical narrative, are these the things we're proud of?
Right.
Is this what we're proud of? That the ways we've used the Act of 1798 most recently for Japanese immigration? Is this what we're proud of? Is that what we want to put forward in this?
Yeah.
And it's so sad. Like, and you said it, Alice, and we've said it already. Like, to know the way that has been used historically, to know that that's how he started his speech, and to have that happen not only on a day that is also choosing to honor Dr. Martin Luther King and all the work that he did around the civil rights movement, but to also have his name uttered in the same speech, and have a black pastor being put on stage to dramatically deliver arguably one of the softest speeches that King ever gave. But the one that everybody wants to quote today, right? But completely forgetting to quote later stuff around, how he thought about Vietnam and poverty. And and militarization, right? Like all of that. Like it's so sad because we're sitting here in this call and we're going, this seems weird, right? But other people have no context in which to think through that.
No, it's because the we, when Donald Trump says we, I think we're all hearing different people. When he says we are going to do this and we're going to do that and we're going to do that, we're like, who are you talking about? And that's what makes it feel unsafe. I think difficult because on the one hand, it feels like he draws very clear distinctions about us and them across a variety of social contexts, whether it's immigrants, whether it's those who voted for him and those who didn't, whether it's the blue state or the red state. He just draws these us and them lines, and yet he stands and gives a speech and he continues to say, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to have, like, who are your promises for? And it makes it feel, I don't know.
Well, and I'm thinking about it in terms of like with you, Alice, like you're dealing with the immigrant community, and not all of them, or should I say, and some of them are all in on what Donald Trump is talking about, right?
Yes, that's exactly. I mean, I think I mentioned this to you guys just recently, but yeah, that's exactly the point that I was about to make is, even, families that come to see me, I have a mix. I have people that are here lawfully and people who are here not lawfully that are seeking, lawful status. But, he got a lot more of the Hispanic vote than last time. And that was increasing. And when, my people that I interact with here, as clients or potential clients, a lot of them surprisingly are very pro-Trump. And so I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand, because you have some people with this rhetoric that Trump is anti-immigrant, Trump is anti-Hispanic, Trump is anti-this, anti-that. But at the same time, we have a lot of these population groups that are increasingly voting for him. And so we have to really come to grips as a society. Why is that happening? What is it that he's saying that is appealing to, these groups? And one of the things, that we see is, I don't think that anybody, red or blue, can really with a straight face say that there's no problem at the southern border. I think everybody really understands that things have gotten out of control. It puts Americans at risk if we don't know who's entering and who's not. We do know that because the southern border is known for being so easy to cross illegally, that people from other countries who are from, previously designated terrorist organizations will enter the United States through the southern border. So we know that other countries are using the southern border to enter the United States illegally. We know that. And so why is it? So everybody kind of agrees we've got to do something about this. So then what do we do? And to see Trump, kind of, fall on this Alien Enemies Act of 1798, it's like, well, is that what we want to do? Is it really what we want to do if you're declaring an invasion from the southern border? Our southern neighbor is Mexico. So are you seriously saying that anyone whose nationality or alienage or citizenship is Mexican is now at risk? Is that really what we want to say? Is that, there's all kinds of constitutional questions that come on, equal protection, due process, everything else. How is this appealing to those, and how is this solving the problem? Also, there are things that can and should be done. And maybe it's just, his advisors have said, look, we've got this power. This is the fastest way we can use it. Let's do it. But it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out and what that's going to look like.
Yeah,
it's very.
And as we're watching President Biden and Joe Biden leave on I forget Marine probably 2 or Marine 1 or 2, depends on what you're going to use. But they're leaving out. It's just a reminder of what happened 4 years ago, where this scene did not take place. We did not have a outgoing president that's doing a peaceful transfer of power, but rather we were in the we were still feeling the the effects of January 6th and all the things that were going on there. But thinking about the outgoing administration and thinking about the incoming administration from your perspective, what are the things that Trump's saying? Are they going to make things better? Are we in such a bad situation on the southern border right now that we're going to see a drastic change into this new administration?
I think we can anticipate some pretty drastic changes. I made some notes, from his speech today, and like I mentioned, the very first topic he talked about was immigration. He immediately said he's declaring a national emergency at the southern border. He is, stopping all illegal entries immediately. He's returning criminal aliens. He is reinstating the Remain in Mexico policy, ending catch and release, putting troops in the southern border to deter an invasion, designating cartels as a foreign terrorist org, the Alien Enemies Act, but he said he was using it to target gangs in the United States. And just, kind of making all of these things, these were the main points that he was saying he's bringing up day one via executive order. I think we can see and expect some immediate changes. I think that we can anticipate increased removals very soon. Here in Houston, we have numerous buses that execute removal orders to Mexico on a daily basis. We've heard, those of us in the community here have heard, all the buses have been serviced, their contracts with private airline carriers are being, reviewed and making sure everything is current. These are just things that we're hearing. I don't know if all of that is true. We think it is, but I think that we can immediately expect that there are going to be more removals in the very near future. One of the things that I have seen is that a lot of people who have what are called ICE check-ins, where they're here and maybe they're in court or they have some type of protection or parole or something, they may have to report to ICE just as a check-in. Hey, this is where I live. I'm still here, whatever. A lot of those have been by an app, or you'll get a link and you have to click a link and take a picture of yourself like, hey, this is where I am. But we're seeing an increase in in-person appointments, demands for in-person appointments. And so a lot of us are preparing our clients like, hey, look, you need to prepare yourself and your family. There's a possibility you show up for that appointment, they're going to detain you.
Wow.
And you're not going home. And so get your affairs in order. We just have to be diligent. And I always tell my clients, I'm going to respect you enough to tell you the truth, good, bad, or ugly. I may be able to help you, I may not be, but you've got to know the risks that you're taking so that you can get your affairs in order and prepare your family.
Man, that's really hard to hear, and I know can probably be terrifying for such a large portion of that community, particularly down in Houston. I know, and as we hear that, and we can kind of circle up on this conversation, if you will, just kind of I know, Alice, obviously you and I have known each other forever. I know that you are deeply connected to this work via your faith. Obviously, Stephen, that's the work that you're doing as well. To help us understand, Stephen, maybe this is for you. Why should the church care anything about what Alice just said? Like, how are you guys communicating that?
If there's a consistent thread throughout Scripture, it's people on the move, right? I mean, it is hard to find any place in Scripture to argue about welcome the stranger and love your neighbor. And this is right to the core of what I think the gospel is about, and back to the Old Testament, right? I mean, God calls people to move for all kinds of reasons, and we have a lot of people needing to move right now. And I think it is a confluence of that aspect of our faith and what I think to be the best aspects of American history and society, of being a refuge? Are we still going to be that place that welcomes people who are persecuted? And it kind of doesn't sound like it. And that's a real problem for me personally, because I think being a place that welcomes those who have been persecuted or in trouble or threat of violence, I mean, that's a place where my faith and what I feel called to do by Scripture has aligned with American history in places and times, not always, but the best of us it has. And so that's where I think we are, and I think that there is so much that the church can do and does do to minister to these folks every day. I want to mention one other thing, just to put it out there to make sure your listeners know. I mean, one, whatever is happening is going to happen in Texas. Our state government is eager to participate, likely internment camps, right? I mean, so if we're in Texas, we should be ready for that. And two, one of the things that I haven't seen come across any news or chat yet, but ICE has had in place something called a sensitive locations memo for years now, which says we're not going to go pursue somebody to try and detain them for deportation if they're in a school, hospital, or church. Right now, the latest news was that Trump is going to do away with that. So if you've got a church serving migrants and you don't check their documentation, you don't know whether they're undocumented or not, but they're coming for food pantry or whatever, maybe even legal help. If they know ICE can just come right into your church now, that's a different feeling for them, perhaps. And so I think when it comes to religious liberty, then that's something I think we're going to want to pay real close attention to, is how do we treat ministries who are ministering to people who might be undocumented.
Man, good convo. In the beginning of more, I'm sure. It's so good to know that folks like you, you two are in this work and able to help. In one case, Alice, I know you're kind of helping in the space that's not necessarily specifically around the church, but right there at the front, right at the legal space. And Stephen, you continuing that work of the legal, but also specifically really trying to help the church engage with that. So I'm so grateful for both of your ministries, because that's what you're both doing for sure. And anything that you guys need, we're here to throw your stuff out there, to participate and to engage. And so so excited about that. Obviously, if anybody's watching this and they are in the Houston area, particularly looking for some help around this immigration work, you can obviously check out Alice at k-immigration.com. And for those of you, like you said, Stephen, you're in Texas. This is a big space. Obviously, those even surrounding areas, the New Mexicos, the Oklahomas, the Louisianas, the Arkansas, right? We're going to see a lot of movement towards that border, and we need to be led by those who are in the ministry engaging this. So definitely can check it out at Fellowship Southwest, fellowshipsouthwest.org. Get involved in a border trip and all the things that are coming along with that. So Alice and Stephen, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and your knowledge. I know our listeners are really happy for that. So thank you guys for coming in, and we'll be in contact later.
Thanks, y'all. Appreciate
Thanks
it.
for having us.
Yeah.
Thanks.
See you later.